Minister, I think, first of all, many of us were very grateful when you first said this is not normal, that it is really time to speak about climate change. In a sense, I think many of us were waiting for that to be said. And I can imagine there's sometimes a personal cost attached to that, but when one speaks out. But as one looks ahead towards the kind of future that you're projecting here, it involves significant political activity whereby you're seeking to build a coalition of interests who will support your project. So how do you deal with leadership in such a time like this when you're having to speak with a coalition which can sometimes be divided, sometimes coming up with alternative perspectives? How do you work across state and federal? How do you convert the hope into political action?
The first thing I'd say is that working? I think so. The first thing I'd say is I didn't think what I said over summer was that controversial. I mean, the fact that you couldn't go outside and breathe the air, the fact that you couldn't see over 100 metres in front of you, it was not normal. I think that was quite obvious. But it needed to be said. And the fact that none of the political leaders, and I'm not trying to be partisan here today, no one on the right of politics, the left of politics, seemed to want to go out there and say what everyone was thinking, was very frustrating. And I was literally running to work and I couldn't breathe, and I then had to give a speech that day, and I just said it. It was just what came out on raw emotion. And I'm so glad that I did, because what it demonstrated is that the sensible people in this discussion need to stand up. The sensible people need to get involved. For too long, the debate has been dominated on the fringes. You've got the lunar left that think you can just shut everything down tomorrow and there'll be no cost to anyone. And then you've got the ridiculous right that think that we shouldn't take any action whatsoever because Australia is such a small country in the overall scheme of things in terms of the contribution it's making to global emissions. Both ends of the argument are totally ridiculous. The centre of Australian politics has vacated the field when it comes to climate change for too long. The centre of Australian politics is where we floated the dollar, the Hawke-Keating government. It's where we opened up our markets to free trade and competition. It's where we liberalised our industrial relations laws. It was where we reformed the taxation system under the Howard regime and reformed the gun laws. It was the centre of Australian politics that stood up and fought for a freer, fairer and more prosperous country in the early 80s, 90s and early 2000s. So where has that tradition been in more recent times? We've lost a decade in grabbing the opportunities of tackling climate change that they'll bring. And the reason we need to tackle climate change is not just to protect our environment, not just to make sure that our kids are able to inherit their birthright, a beautiful natural landscape, but because we need to make sure as a small open market economy we can continue to be a prosperous nation. And in a low carbon world, as I said in the speech, there is no one better placed on the planet to be able to deliver low cost electricity because of our solar, wind and water resources. And we've got to grab it because other countries are moving in that direction. And let me tell you, that's where the jobs will go. That's where the manufacturing will go. That's where the opportunities will go. And I've had my first son. And it's really coming home to me that the opportunities that I've had, he may not have unless we get this right. And it's a conversation that should have started, Margaret Thatcher started this in 1992. George H.W. Bush signed an agreement, said that the stake here from an environmental perspective and from an economic perspective. And I represent a new generation of Australian politicians. And I think that, the reason I got into politics was to help make our country freer, fairer and more prosperous. So I've got to do my bit. We've all got to do our bit. And hopefully me coming out has encouraged a number of my colleagues, particularly on the right of politics, to stand up as well. And it's starting to happen. You're starting to see a shift. The community is shifting dramatically. I think the community wants action on climate change. I think they're desperate for action on climate change. But what they're concerned about is the cost of that action. And elections have been won and lost in recent times on that issue of cost, but I think the debate has shifted because the economics have changed recently. We can now take action on climate change because it is the cheapest way to deliver electricity, because new technology is coming in and delivering better solutions to how we drive around, how we go about our lives. So decarbonisation is happening because of the economics of this. And what's standing in the way is government. So if government can get a framework in place that allows that transition to occur, this thing is going to be turbocharged and we're going to be the major beneficiaries.
I'm going to convert my other 14 questions into one. Spoke about the change in the popular mind here in Australia, and we can see how different kinds of issues surface in the electoral cycle. How does one maintain the profile of the case you're making for the need to respond to climate change when so often other issues arise and ambush the urgency of what we've been through? I'm thinking here, of course, the news media now is full page after page of the coronavirus situation, and all of a sudden find that issues to do with the climate emergency and what we've been through have gone to the back page.
Well, hasn't that always been the case? I mean, listening to John before, it's not as if the Hawke and Keating government said, well, look, the biggest thing we have to do is float the dollar and we won't do anything else during that time. And they had enormous challenges. So you have to manage the day-to-day media cycle. You have to make sure that government is doing its job of ensuring that when people get sick, they can be treated in hospitals and that they can get to work because the trains are running on time, blah, blah, blah. But we've also got to not just focus on the daily news cycle. We've got to think about what type of state, what type of country we want to be. I mean, this is what leadership is about. What is the vision that... I wish elections were fought on competing visions for the type of country we want to have, and let people go and say, yeah, that's the type of country I want to be in, and let the leaders go out and sell that positive message. But I'm concerned that we don't always see that. Yes, we need to address the day-to-day issues. Governments, political parties have different solutions to different problems, but you can't ignore the big macro challenges that we face, because you're probably, 10 years ago when the climate discussion was really starting to heat up, you probably weren't seeing the impacts of climate change at that point in time, and there were more pressing concerns to deal with immediately. But now we're at a stage where we are seeing the impacts of climate change. And this summer really drove it home. And it's going to get worse. It is going to get worse. That's not to say that Australia alone will solve climate change. Global warming is a global issue. But Australia is well placed to not only do our bit, but to help other countries do their bit, because of the technology that we can develop here through our universities, through our entrepreneurs and innovators, because of the sun and wind resources, the hydrogen opportunity here. We can have a disproportionate effect on the world stage in reducing global emissions, and we should grab it. And you don't have to grab it because you're a greenie. You can grab it because you're a capitalist and you want to make money. There's a huge opportunity for us.
Thank you. Because we're under time constraints, we'll go for questions now, Richard.
I can answer not a speech to this one. Tell me, how are you countering the antediluvian and reactionary people in your party, like your Deputy Premier John Barilaro, who wants nuclear power? And are you going to win that debate?
Well, I intend to win that debate because I intend to stick to the facts and the science. And the facts at the moment are that the cheapest way of delivering electricity into the system is, or the electrons into the system, is solar and wind backed up by pumped hydro, batteries, a bit of gas at the moment. Gas is still quite affordable at the moment, but that will change. That will change. Nuclear, I met with I was recently over in Belgium, and Belgium was 100% nuclear, and I met with ENGIE, who's the major provider of nuclear in Belgium, and they are the major provider of nuclear in France. You know what their CEO told me? He said, we're not going to build a nuclear power plant ever again. And I said, why? He said, Because renewables are far cheaper. We can, the cost around all the safety and, systems and processes you have to put in place around nuclear is exorbitant. It's huge. So you can get a better outcome at far lower cost with new technology, which is getting cheaper and cheaper in the renewable space. So why would you go to nuclear? So for the people arguing for nuclear, you're actually arguing for more expensive electricity, which is less safe and dirtier. I don't think that's a good argument. Am I going to win that debate? Well, I intend to by sticking to the facts, making the case, bringing the community along with me. I'm happy for people to have a discussion, have points of view, whether it be nuclear or other forms of technology. Let's debate them properly. Let's get the public involved in that debate. Politicians are pretty simple beings. They react to community sentiment, and the community sentiment is changing. They don't want dirty electricity. They don't want expensive electricity, and they don't want unreliable electricity. And we can deliver cheap, reliable, clean electricity at the moment through renewables, and we should be taking that opportunity.
The first hand up there was yes.
Yes, thanks very much for taking the stand that you've been taking.
I like your T-shirt.
Oh, yeah, thanks. It's very refreshing to hear. I'm concerned, though, and you were talking about planting trees and congratulating those people, the fact that we're still logging New South Wales forests. And do you have in mind any kind of timeline? And those forests are habitats to koalas and endangered species. Do you have any kind of timeline by which you might be able to end this insane practice?
Look, it's important to remember that there are whole communities that rely on our natural resources, timber. Those communities, like coal communities, like communities that rely on mining, we need to understand that those are families too that need to put food on the table. There are jobs in that. So we need to make sure that if we are going to move away from those industries, that a proper transition is put in place, proper support, new jobs are created, new opportunities. What I'm focused on at the moment is making sure that we don't shut down existing jobs, but we create new ones so that that transition occurs. You can't tell someone we're going to stop logging tomorrow without having an alternate solution. What I'm working on at the moment is alternate solutions for the mining industry, for the timber industry, for the electricity industry. I'm not saying shut down those jobs tomorrow. I'm not. I'm saying let's create the new jobs and opportunities which are coming, and they'll be big and they'll be very prosperous and well-paying. Let's build those industries so that there can be an orderly transition across. But let's be honest with those communities, not so much timber, but let's talk about the coal communities. Nothing that government can do. There's not a lot that Australian governments can do to save their jobs. Their jobs and their fate will be determined by international markets. And those international markets are shifting their demand, not just for coal, but for the type of sustainable timber products that they're purchasing. So what we need to do is make sure that we're providing opportunities for new jobs and new industries to be created in a low-carbon future, and helping people upskill, train, transition across. That's what my focus is. So specifically with regard to logging, no, we're not going to be shutting that down tomorrow, but we need to be looking at ways of doing things differently in the future, which is exactly what we're doing. With regard to planting trees, we've got so much land. Global capital is looking for offsets. Offsets because it's not zero emissions reduction, it's net zero. So there will still be carbon in our atmosphere. What we need to do is sequester it. And Australia is really well placed to provide new revenue streams for our farmers and our agriculture sector through how they manage their land and how they sequester carbon. So that's one of the opportunities which could create new industries and jobs for those communities that currently rely on different natural resources for their livelihoods.
Yeah, thank you for your very positive approach to climate change. I think it's a really important issue. I was also concerned about the old growth forest issue because in Australia, after the bushfires, obviously we've got a real problem there. And I'm also conscious that, like miners in Western Australia are asking to be retrained, coal miners, because they know the industry's on the way out, particularly over there. So what's your government doing in terms of that sort of retraining program? I think that's, to me, a really important aspect for both forest people and mining people.
Yeah, this is not just an environmental play or an energy play. It needs to be an industry play, a whole of government play, a whole of nation play. The economy is in transition, and that means not only changing the way we get our energy and drive our cars and a whole range of things, but it also includes making sure that our workforce is able to transition across, take advantage of new opportunities. So we're changing our curriculum. We're doing a review at the moment in New South Wales, what we're teaching our kids in schools, to make sure that they are able to succeed and thrive in the new economy that they will face when they leave school. But also making sure that our TAFE and our university system is equipping them for life in the new world. So our focus is on making sure that the tools to educate our people are providing with the information they need to thrive in the new economy. So the courses you can do in TAFE today aren't the ones you could do 20 years ago. The courses you can do in university, where everyone's enrolling, and aren't the same as what was there 20 years ago. So the government is facilitating that transition through our education system, but we realise that this is not just something that can be solved in the education space or in the environment space or energy space. It needs a whole of government approach to this, because every lever of government needs to be pulled in order to set us up for the opportunities that are there, if we're going to grab them.
One last question.
Just going to that levers of government question. The framework is set by government, but government also needs to set the rails. It seems that at the moment, governments in Australia, whether state or federal, are failing on the rails question. And an example from what you've just alluded to, 2 generations of unemployment followed the closure of the manufacturing industry in areas like Geelong. You've got Nor Lane, which is now 2 generations in, because people said, oh, we'll plan for the future, but you people who are threatened now, well, sorry, that's tough. The way to solve this is through eliminating fear. You've got fear in the coal mining communities, fear in the rural communities over land clearing. That fear is directly related to people who feel they will be left on a scrap heap.
Yeah, we've seen the fear prevail in Australian politics to the electoral advantage. People have used fear to win elections or win their seats or whatever. We're seeing that fear's being stoked in Queensland, for example, that taking action on climate change is going to destroy jobs, going to smash their paychecks, going to take away their prosperity. That's not the case. There is such a great message of hope here, such a great message of the type of country that is possible and is totally achievable. So I'm certainly not going to be playing to people's fears. I certainly intend on explaining to people the economic opportunities and the environmental opportunities that are presented here in New South Wales. And, I just encourage people to support candidates regardless of their political colour or persuasion, who are talking about taking positive plans for our state and our country at elections or in the community. If you're a Labor voter and you see a Liberal that's saying something you agree with, let them know. Send them an email. If you're a Liberal voter and you're seeing a Green voter and you're seeing something that you like, let them know. We need to be encouraging good behaviour, particularly in the climate space. But we need to be moving away from this politics of fear. The US elections just, they're mind-boggling for me. Someone on the centre-right of politics, and I see a guy like Trump in the White House who's got there based on the politics of fear. And I think, how did we come to this? So I intend to try and be different. I intend to try and, talk about vision and opportunity and the type of country we should be. And I hope that the small example that I'm setting will encourage others to do the same on the right of politics and throughout our body politic. So you're not wrong. I don't have the solution, but I'm certainly going to try and set an example.
Well, thank you very much for your questions. And on your behalf, I'd like to thank Minister Kean first of all, for accepting our invitation and also for then giving us a taster, because, of course, many of the issues which have just been spoken about, we could go on for quite some time, and there are many more as well. I'd like to call upon Paul McCarthy, Executive Manager of Strategy and Governance of the Australian National Maritime Museum, to present a small gift of appreciation to the Minister on behalf of Affinity.